Good morning. I haven't done a video like this for quite a long time, but I woke up this morning in the way that I kind of used to when I was doing all those videos in respect of the Lucy Letby case, with this sort of my head sort of full of thoughts and ideas. Well, not so much ideas, but a certain connection, and I think it was set off by reading an article that was written by Sarita Adams on the Science on Trial website. The article's called some final thoughts. I just realised that some final thoughts on the Lucy Letby appeal. I don't know. Anyway, that's what the title is. Just want to read the last paragraph here. This acted as a trigger, because I was only going to really do another video about it when we'd heard something with regard to the application for appeal, because I don't want to repeat the things I've said before, and I haven't come across anything new that anyone else has said particularly to point people to, and that was one of the main reasons to do the videos, to point people to Law, Health and Tech Substack, Science on Trial, the articles on Chimp Investor, Richard Gill, other people's ideas that you see on Twitter, and information that they've gleaned or they've found out, things like that. Anyway, I'll read this last paragraph. Still, there is much speculation as to the basis of Letby's ongoing appeal. I'll say Lucy Letby. I don't really like it when people just... anyway, that's beside the point. Basis of Lucy Letby's ongoing appeal. What seems very clear is that in the event she seeks to submit as new evidence the opinion of a similar expert witness to the one she failed to use at the trial, she may find this approach has the opposite effect to which she intended. Instead of raising doubt as to the veracity of the prosecution experts, it may send a message to the Court of Appeal that she is seeking a second bite at the apple. One cannot tackle a case with the scientific complexity observed in that of Lucy Letby's case without taking an investigation into the cause of death of the infants. Anything less than that is not only wholly unscientific, it is also unnecessarily limiting, as it forces the appeal to be based on only that which the prosecution alleged and foregoes any opportunity to identify new evidence which is independent of the medical opinion of prosecution experts. So as I say, that was kind of like a triggering read for me. I got the email about it this morning, or yesterday actually, but I've thought about it overnight. I've thought a lot of things about it in terms of the absolutely horrific position that Lucy Letby is in and has been placed in and forced in by this system and certain individuals who have conducted a program of actions of their own, through their own will, in order to put her in this terrible, terrible situation within that system. I might dot around here because I've written some notes, but I'm going to have to dot around because I could write it all out, but I find that so laborious and I lose the flow of things. And one thing I was thinking of, there's a quote by St. Augustine of Hippo. It's a quote that's sometimes quoted quite a bit, and it says, he said, this guy called Augustine, back in the day, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose, it will defend itself." And I love that quote. I do love it, and I love the spirit behind it and the idea of it. And would that it were so in all contexts. The trouble is, the system, that adversarial system, and I'm going to come back to that later about the system that we employ in terms of so-called justice in this country, is very often not suitable for allowing the truth to defend itself. It's got certain dynamics to it that it's not an impartial seeking after truth, the system. It's about, as I think I said in other videos, it's kind of which side puts on the best show in a way. It's a kind of theatre. And in this particular case, it's a very grim, sinister, dark theatre that was played out and has been played out. So, you can have all the truth, you can let it loose in that arena, in that forum of the court, and how will it defend itself? Even if it was fully let out, and I don't think it was by the defence. The defence was focused. The point of this video is about what the defence's choices are going forward within that system now, and I think with terrible limitations placed on it because of the system as it is, and what ramifications then flow on from that in respect of Lucy Letby and her plight. So yeah, it's quite cold here. I'm not putting the heating on at the moment. You don't have to defend the truth, just let it loose and it will defend itself. These are kind of two performing sides essentially, almost like some weird, strange talent competition in which the audience is the jury to decide which is the story that they want to go with. Which story are they going to choose is the best story to go with? It's not an impartial seeking after truth, caring about truth above all. It's which can convince the jury with the best story, but it's not as simple as that even. It's which can capture the jury's minds and emotions and drive them emotionally onto their side. So it's not about just the unvarnished truth, it's about capturing their emotions and telling this story which will get them hooked. And unfortunately, like the majority of people who have responded to this case and this trial and reading it in the media and the journalists that write about it, the majority of people seem to, right from the get-go, throughout and then beyond it, prefer the story of the serial killer. They want that story. Because it gets them worked up in a kind of, there's a kind of weird sadistic pleasure there, often, that people won't really want to talk about. They prefer that story, even if it doesn't exist, and it doesn't exist. There are no crimes, there are no murders. But that's dull in comparison. The idea that it's a systemic failure and a series of medical doctor failures and NHS failures and problems in that ward related to sepsis, related to the leaking drains and the pipes and all this sort of thing, the understaffing, all the things we went through ad nauseum, over and over again, all the details of that is dull in comparison to the idea of the serial killer nurse. And that's the story they want, because it gets them, it drives them emotionally, and they're driven into that. And the jury are the same in that situation. So poor old Augustine with the truth defending itself. Well, it depends who the auditors of the truth are. If you're relying on the auditors, the people who are listening to your claim of the truth, or listening to the truth speaking itself, if the auditors are just driven by this other story emotionally, the truth can very well defend itself. Yes, it can do, in truth, but in the forum of the court, the emotionally driven story can still hold sway, and an innocent person is convicted. Going back to Sarita Adams' article and that last paragraph that I read, it made me think of and this is a bit of an unusual segue, 9/11, and I watched a lot of that about that over the years. There's a researcher and a scientist. She's a scientist of materials and how they act under pressure. So called Judy Wood. You may have heard of her. She wrote a book called Where Did the Towers Go? And when I've seen her in interviews and in the book as well, her main premise is what you start with, the first question you should ask is what happened? Not who did it, not why did they do it, not did somebody do it, but what happened? You need to know what the answer to that is. What happened? But what was led, all the official reports that came out through NIST, it's an acronym, anyway, Science and Technology, the cover-up, basically, report of the 9/11 Towers attack, or whatever it was, really, was all focused on and driven by, emotionally, by who did it. Even though I don't personally believe that the people they say who did it at all. But that should be well after you've decided on what's happened. So, in short, Judy Wood's premise is that where did the towers go is that people are missing the absolute obvious that they actually see in front of their eyes. They see these towers dematerializing as they fall. They see massive steel columns dematerializing. Dustifying is the word that she coined. Dustifying as it falls against all the normal potentials of these materials to act like that through an explosion or a collapse. And people it's literally happening in front of their eyes, but they won't see it, they can't see it, they won't see it. The reason I brought that up is the principal approach should be, in this case, I'm going to leave out the idea whether it's an adversarial system or the system like they got in France, where I'm not sure exactly how that works, but there's meant to be a slightly different system in which you're just going after what is the truth of the events that are alleged to have occurred, is that you've got to ask what happened. Because of the adversarial system here, the defence were fighting the prosecution, because that's how that system works, fighting them. But the awful realisation that really came together for me this morning is that if you fight them, you lose, because you're in their story then. You're in their story, you're in their world, and they can tell a better, more emotional, driven story than the defence. That 12 people, good and true, the first 12 people you'd meet in the street will go, oh, well, that's convincing, because they've said there are murders, so who is the murderer? But what's missing here is, going back, like Judy Wood goes back to those collapse of those towers, what happened? And this ties in with, I know I'm dotting around, but this ties in with Sarita's final part, is that if you fight the prosecution on trying to say that Lucy Letby is not the murderer, you've lost. Because the falsehood, the great lie of it, is that there are murders that have happened, deliberate murders. And once you start fighting them to say this isn't the murderer, then you're lost, because you've bought into the story that there is a murderer, even at whatever level you do it. So the principal level they did it was, and the coup de grace that the defence actually created, in a sense, for their own client, Lucy, was acknowledging that there was tampering, deliberate tampering of the TPN bags in respect of somebody putting insulin there to cause deliberate harm. Now, because I don't have the full transcript, or any of the actual transcript, I've got the reporting of the transcript, or reporting of the events, I don't know exactly what the defence said there, to what degree they acknowledged the fact that, I know Lucy was sort of pushed into a position where she had to say, yes, someone added insulin to those TPN bags, but it wasn't me. I don't know whether explicitly the defence, and thereby Lucy, acknowledged that that was a deliberately malicious thing to do, or was it just a mistake that had happened, that they acknowledged something had been added that shouldn't have been added, but it was a mistake and it could have happened thereby. Because with baby F, for example, one of their twin was on insulin, and that could have been given to that twin in error. There's this other thing that I'm really sorry, but I can't remember the Twitter user that came up with this, is that there was a nurse on the ward around that time, on those days, when those TPN bags were being given, that had trained in Australia, and that was a systemic thing they did. They would add the insulin to the TPN bags, whereas they don't tend to do that. They give it through other means in the UK. So there's all kinds of potentials for that. And then we're also back to the idea of the tests being completely unreliable. So in other words, was there any excess? Was there any insulin or excess insulin given at all? But because there was an acknowledgement that somebody had done it, you're back into the prosecution story, you're back into Evans's story, you're back into the police's story, the CPS's story, and their story is about a murderer, that there's been all these murders. And it's really, really hard to convince the jury then. It's harder, is it not? This is what I'm wondering. Is it not harder to convince the jury that it wasn't Lucy, it was someone else? It's much harder to convince that there weren't any murders at all, because you've got to get them to believe that all these agencies, over a period of years and years, they put millions of pounds into it, the police, CPS, these so-called experts like Evans, and all these other experts turning up on the day, they've all done it. And it's all completely for nothing, because there were no murders. And it's all in cover-up of actually what was going on, which was systemic failure of that unit. You've got to get them to believe that. And that's not easy at all. That's really, really hard. But the only way you could do that is to not fight the prosecution. As soon as you fight them, you're in their world. I don't know if I've got this right, but it's just, and I know how impractical this sounds, and it's because of the adversarial system. We're kind of almost stuck with it. Going back to what the strategy might be for a retrial, if Lucy is given a retrial, surely would it not need, because the story isn't that it wasn't Lucy. It's almost, this is, I know I'm dotting around it. When I did that 10-part series and I ended up with Lucy, and I had this realisation that none of this is about Lucy. She's been pointed out. She's a story in other people's heads, their version of her. But she's nothing to do with all the madness in their heads, the sickness, the arrogance in their heads of the police, of Evans, of those consultants. Had it not been her, it would have been someone like her. It would have been another conscientious nurse, another beyond the norm caring nurse. It would have been someone else. It could have been a male nurse. It could have been, but it would have had to have been someone like her, someone who cared more than the average nurse does, probably, and is more conscientious. And that's what, in some diabolical way, drew the attention of those awful, awful people, those consultants, towards her. Was her virtue, were her virtues. That's what drew them, actually. It's perverse, and it's the opposite of what should happen. But that's what drew them. And then once they're fixed on that, the police just want a juicy case, and they're not gonna. They haven't got the intelligence and the wit. Unfortunately, these particular ones, they're grandstanding. They really want to get into this meaty case of this serial killer. They're excited by it, in the same way that the trash journalists are excited by it, in the same way as the YouTubers that want it to continue, like the crime scene to courtroom character. he's not going to be making a series of videos about, I've said this before, about how bad that ward was, because he's going to think, well, nobody's going to be interested in that. People want to hear about murderers and serial killers. I'll do that. It's the least line of resistance. Yeah, maybe he believes it. I don't know. It's almost secondary whether he believes it or not. It's just that it's a story that captures the emotions more, and that's what they'll go with. And for someone like that, and the so-called journalists, they're not journalists really, but it's about money. It's money, 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 money. So trying to get back on track about what you need to do is, going back to that Judy Wood example, what happened? The primary question is what happened, is to go through each of those so-called cases of those deaths, of those babies and the crashes, but all of them actually, not just the 17 they cherry-picked, all of them across that period. And through the medium of a series of so-called experts, or actual experts, good ones, if you can find them, explain as best as you can and give another story, the story about what happened to those babies, what was their experience, what were all the threats to them health-wise, and all the failures in the medical failures that could have been part of why they deteriorated. You need to do that for each and every one. You need a whole series of experts, and similarly as the prosecution had, and how much money did that cost them? So we're back to the money situation again. As soon as you start to, because the story's complete crap, it's not a case here where it wasn't her, it was someone else, they got the wrong person. It's that there was no crime. I mean, there are crimes in terms of as culpability, medical negligence. There's corporate negligence here, which might lead to sort of criminal charges, or at least, I don't know how that would be worked out, but that's why people get all this compensation when there are such levels of failure like that, which leads to death. I'm losing my track. You've got to have this, as soon as you start trying to defend Lucy and say, oh, no, she was just looking up these Facebook. Oh, when she said, oh, I'm coming back with a bang, it didn't mean what you said it meant. She's taking the handover sheets, and most of them aren't to do with the babies that died or crashed. As soon as you get into their world, the jury, the audience, the people who decide they're back in that emotional world of deciding which is the most interesting story, emotionally. And the only way to do it is actually utterly, and I mean this not in the way that's abused by people like Evans and the fool Hughes, but to clinically go through, in a similar way that Dr. Scott McLachlan did in the articles, each baby, but all of them, all of the cases of every crash and every death across that year and a half, from the beginning of 2015 to when Lucy let be. No, actually, all of 2016 as well. Because why wouldn't you do the whole thing? Because the idea of stopping in July 2016, just coincidentally when Lucy Letby is told to leave the ward. No. All of 2015, all of 2016. And have a series of experts in every field that you can possibly think of. Describe to the jury, the auditors, what happened in each case medically, what happened scientifically, to do it scientifically and medically in great, great detail. But there we have the problem. Can the average jury deal with that? Can the average jury have the subtlety of thinking individually and collectively to pull away from the emotionally driven story of the prosecution into listening to this massive welter of of the other story, which is the medical and scientific analysis of what happened to each of those babies during their experience of being in that Chester hospital. Can they do it? And I don't think so. And that's the failure of the adversarial system. But it's too much for them. It's too much for them because they won't want to. And the defence wouldn't do it. And the defence wouldn't do it. You wouldn't get a barrister to do it, I don't think. In an ideal world, you would. And they can't afford it because it's down to money again. And not only that, can you get the people? Can you get that range of experts to speak on behalf, to genuinely look at what has happened medically, scientifically, at each and individual case across those 2 years, not just the cherry-pick cases? Can you get them to do it? Because the majority of people that you'd want to speak about it may be working for the NHS, or have some tie to the NHS, or their pensions tied to it, or something that would make them very reluctant to speak at all, let alone get a whole panel of them. I mean, the prosecution had, what did they have, 8 or 9 of them, or something like that. You need at least as many. For every single case, it would take a long, long, long time, as it should, as it must do. But that system wouldn't allow it. And it would cost many millions of pounds probably to get the people, if you could get them. And if you couldn't get them in this country because of their not willing to effectively testify against the NHS, because that's what they'd be doing, because they'd be saying what everything that was wrong with a lot of those doctors' practices and what was wrong with that ward and that hospital overall, and thereby the NHS. You're not going to get them probably in this country. You're not going to get what you need to look at it impartially in this country, because they're worried about their own ties to the NHS. So you'd have to probably go abroad, so that's going to be even more money. So they're not going to do that. I mean, you should be able to do it. And it's not suitable for a jury, really. Because it's at such a level of what Dr. Scott does in some of the individual cases, baby D, baby F. You need to go through that, and even more so, it's wonderful what he's done there, but you'd have to do it with every single child, every single baby across those 2 years, every single crash, every single thing, to build the picture up about what was going on in that ward and what the threats were to those very, very vulnerable neonate babies. Bruce Lee had that concept of fighting without fighting. It's like a paradox. But in relation to what I was saying about the prosecution, as soon as you get into the prosecution's world of defending Lucy Letby's character, you're kind of lost. You're in their fight now. There was something I watched about this guy. I think he's some kind of ex-Marine, or Jocko Willink, I think is his name. He talks about martial arts and stuff like that a lot. And he says when people want to pull you into trouble in the streets or in a public area, they want to start trouble with you. Their main intention is to pull you into their world. And the trouble with this case is that the defence are fully pulled into the world of the prosecution story, and having to defend all these bizarre things, and having to come up and losing all their energy. They're losing all their energy and all their resources, mental, physical, spiritual resources, into defending all these bizarre claims by complete charlatans like Evans, and ridiculous things that have come up with these daft non-positions in the police investigation, like this character who went and found all these secret codes. It's all in their fucking imagination. I didn't want to swear. Anyway, it's all in their imagination. Things like, I'm coming back with a bang, It's a sign that I'm going to kill some more babies. It's so absurd. It's so insulting. This is what I was thinking. Yeah, I've got to get back to what I was thinking this morning as I was lying in bed before I got up, is The prosecution's case is beneath contempt. Everything they say about Lucy is beneath contempt. It's not worthy arguing directly with. The job at hand should be to say what happened to those babies. They're so beneath contempt, everything to do with that police investigation, those consultants, Evans, all those clowns, all those hired clowns, so-called experts that came and for their 20 pieces of silver to damn an innocent person are beneath contempt. The prosecution barrister is beneath contempt. And here we have the rub, here we have the problem that the jury are expecting you to fight them, are expecting you to prove them wrong. But then you do that and you lose all your energy, you lose all your... You're not fighting without fighting anymore. You've lost everything because you're in their emotionally driven story. And the only way out of this for Lucy Letby is to not find out, but to say what happened medically and scientifically in terms of those deteriorations, those crashes and those deaths. To tell that story outside, separate from, completely disconnected from any of the assertions that the prosecution have made. Because it's not about Lucy Letby, it's about the hospital. It's about that ward, it's about the failure systemically of that. It's not about defending how she's dressed and whether she said she was in a nightie or whatever it was. Don't go there, you can't go there. But we're stuck with this. We're stuck. The horror of this is being stuck in this adversarial system where you're forced almost to fight. There's this saying about, looking into the abyss. Don't look into the abyss too long, the abyss looks into you. This is what happens to the defence in this situation, is that they are in the abyss then. And then the jury's watching back and saying, well, the abyss is winning. The abyss of lies is winning, and it's an interesting story, and there's no one else here. The other main reason that they won't give this up, the system as a whole, the collective systems, the interaction of all these institutions, CPS, police, NHS, the judge in all his pomp and regality and arrogance, all of this, the whole system. Because, and this is so sick and sinister to acknowledge, is that they would all, and the consultants, these monstrous characters, they would all rather an innocent person is damned for the rest of their lives to incarceration and lied about and their lives destroyed, a kind of a soul murder, a murder of their lives. They would rather that than look foolish. They would rather that than be shown as wrong and foolish, and worse than foolish, wicked. Wicked in their foolishness, wicked in their arrogance to push this lie forward and not let it go once they'd got it. Not let their victim go once they'd got their victim, because Lucy Letby is the victim of that, of all those aspects of that system. And the shame and the degradation they would rightfully feel, righteously feel. It's so awful for them to contemplate that they would clearly, the least line of resistance is to let it stand. To let it stand. I think there are people involved in that situation that at least suspect or probably even know that what they've done and what they're part of is absolutely monstrous. But they don't want to turn it back. They don't want to do it. They can't do it. The system will always want to protect itself. The NHS, more than it would want to help any individual, wants to protect itself as an entity. Same for the police, same for the CPS, same for the so-called justice system. It's all about self-protection. And the money and status that flows through all that. And being protected from the mistakes you've made, and worse than mistakes, the negligence, the heartless, remorseless negligence bred of arrogance, bred of uncaring, bred of incompetence. To protect all that, of course, in their minds, in that psychopathic mentality, of course you're going to let the innocent person be crucified rather than take that hit of that being exposed, of all that being exposed, all that negligence being exposed. You're not going to take the hit, no. You'll let that person take the hit. You'll make them take the hit. So I don't know really. I don't know what the approach can be within that system even. We don't know what the grounds are. But like Sir Rita Adams is saying there, the idea that it will be reduced to an attempt at a second bite at the cherry, i.e. would another jury just see it differently? It's not doing it, and it's not going to do it. It's almost that the approach needs to be something that system can't handle and won't want and won't accept and won't allow, which is a scientific and systematic, actually forensic approach to looking at every single death and crash across those 2 years. Outside of the idea to unroll the lie, actually, because once they'd got the idea there were murderers, then there were murders, then there has to be a murderer, and then they can't let go of that. But you have to unroll all that, start afresh and say, what happened here? So it's almost as though it can't be done through a retrial of Lucy, because there should never have been a trial of Lucy. There should never have been that. We're in this utterly Kafkaesque world of to try to prove her. We're in this bizarre thing where it's not like you're trying to prove her innocent of these crimes. There are no crimes. And to get a jury to really get that individually and collectively, to get that is a massive, massive task. Because they think, God, these police, look at that, look at all the resources they've thrown at this for years. And all these experts have been brought to bear, and they read out all their so-called qualifications. And they say, well, they can't be that bad to have been doing this for fucking years, and none of it's happened. There were no murders. None of it's happened. We can't believe that story. It's too much of a... It's like, like the idea of a massive ocean liner. It's like trying to turn it in the water. It takes a long time to turn round. To turn that round under the pressure, under the time pressure of a trial. So I know it's kind of almost, it's a kind of there's a desolation here about what's possible. I'll write some other notes. What did I put? I mentioned Bruce Lee fighting without fight. Andrew Malkinson, after 17 years. And that's a situation where there was an actual guilty party, but it wasn't him. And that took 17 years. And this is a situation where there was no crime. And that's a kind of different order of a problem we have here. There was no crime. There's so much investment gone into the idea that there was deliberate crimes happening here, as opposed to systemic failure and negligence of the NHS. That's what's at stake here, to try to get that across to people, to specific people in a courtroom under time pressures. And how do you do that if you haven't got the resources to present it in the way it would have to be presented? Not fighting the prosecution, not playing their game, not, as Jocko Willink, the martial artist said, not being pulled into their world. Don't allow yourself to be pulled into their world. And that goes back to the Augustine quote. You don't have to defend Lucy Letby. You have to say what happened to the babies. And then now defending Lucy Letby takes care of itself, because the truth takes care of itself. You tell the truth about what's happened to those babies in that unit. What falls out of that necessarily is that Lucy's nothing to do with that. She's working there, but she's nothing to do with the cause of those babies dying. If anything, her being there probably ensured that fewer babies died or crashed. She was a benefit in that failing system. She was a benefit to it. She was one of the best parts of a system that's failing. I hope I made that clear, what I mean by that. It's like, I looked at these, I wasn't going to say about this, I will, yeah. I looked at some of these arseholes on this, I can't remember the name of the site, a scumbag's website, and they were like talking about the videos I'd done and insulting me, and I don't give a fuck about that. But if you engage with those kind of low vibrational vampiric entities, they love it. They want that. The prosecution barrister, when they're making much of the of things that Lucy said in texts and WhatsApp messages, and getting all emotionally grandstandy about that, and really enjoying it, like they do, they love it. They're like actors, unfortunately, I don't want actors. I don't want actors in the court. I don't want people giving performances in the court. We don't want it. This is about the truth. It should be about the truth, but we got this flouncy kind of theatrical character making these kind of scoring these little points, psychological points. That's their dark, false, fake, unreal story, but it's very, very powerful emotionally for a jury listening. And that's the problem with this adversarial system. But I just don't know what can unroll this. I don't know what can unroll it, unless I hope they've got something they can pull out the bag, the defence. Something. I'm imagining it's going to be the grounds something to do with some error of process. But then, that being as it may, what do you do with the retrial? What approach do you take with a retrial? As Dr. Scott has said, I think in a comment on one of his Substacks in one of the interactions, is that if they just do the same thing again, what profiteth them? What profit will it be to just to repeat the same approach? It can't be that, and they need a whole lot of money, and then we're back to that follow the money thing. You need a whole lot of money to do what you'd need to do, and you kind of need a different system of assessing what's happened here as well. So I don't know. Still waiting to hear whether the even leave to appeal has been granted. The system closes ranks, the institutions hug each other and do not want and will not want and won't have it that they're made to look like the basket cases they are. In many cases, in many ways, the basket cases they are. And the lack of care there, the lack of conscience there. They won't allow that to happen. They don't want that. They don't want to be shamed in the public arena for what they've done. And that's the massive ocean liner to turn round in terms of telling another story that within our system, a group of people can listen to and say, hold on a minute, yeah, that sounds more likely when you tell us it like that that child died of sepsis, that child died of neck, that child, the reason why there was a so-called air embolus there was due to CPR. Whatever it happens to be, the insulin, I'm a bit rusty with some of the details now because I haven't thought about it for a while. With the insulin, we cannot rely at all on those tests at all. Should never have been brought into evidence. A decent judge would never have allowed it into evidence because the tests aren't. It would unfairly again, emotionally, unfairly sway a jury. But it was all allowed. I don't know if I'm repeating myself now. I don't know if there's anything else that I wrote here. If you fight the prosecution head on to defend Lucy's character and name, you lose. You lose. It's not about her. It's about what happened to those babies. And I know it is about her in that situation because they're trying to get her. They're trying to destroy her, and they have destroyed her life. I mean, they've destroyed the life she should have had. And I hope to God that she's finding strength from somewhere. Certainly from the knowledge that she's innocent, but from her family, and that something's getting through to her. And here's the other side of things, is that from what we hear, nothing that these people with a great deal of knowledge like Dr. Scott and you know, Richard Gill and Sarita, what they're doing, nothing seems to be getting through to the defence team or Lucy or other representatives or people close to her, as far as we're told and as far as I know. I was going to start talking about a personal problem that I've got, in which it's the same type of idea that if you fight it directly, you lose. You've got to find other ways to do it. When people are lying about you, they want you to spend all your energy, to empty all your vitality and energy out into fighting their lies, rather than seeing them as beneath contempt and letting the lion of truth out. The lion of truth can only come out through this very, very specific analysis. As Sarita Adams is saying, there's scientific, in-depth analysis of what's happened to each of those babies, but it mustn't just be the 17 related to the charges. It must be all of them. So you get the whole picture across those 2 years, what's happening in that unit. Will the system of this court, of this so-called justice system, allow that even to happen? And could an average jury understand, cope with all that? That's my thing, I wonder, and I think it's unlikely. Well, it's almost definitely no, that the system won't allow it. And the system won't afford it on behalf of Lucy Letby. It won't give her those resources. It will give itself endless resources to destroy her. It won't give her anything like similar resources to defend herself against the lie. I think I might leave it there. I think that's pretty much it. It's fucking terrible. There's no other way to say it. Monstrous. A profoundly evil situation that quite a number of people that would deign to call themselves professional, have created for another person, and covered up the real reasons for all the deaths at the same time, and misled all the parents, and put the burden on those parents to carry for the rest of their lives, that their children were deliberately harmed by an individual. The lie of that, they put that burden on all those parents as well and their families. It's fucking beyond evil, actually. But how to, and in what context, and in what forum, in what way, how do you let, as St. Augustine said, I'll read it. How do you let it loose, the truth? How do you let it defend itself in all its power, in its majesty, in its beauty, the beauty of truth? How do you let that happen within a system that really, 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 really doesn't want you to do that? Thank you.